In 1999, the respected Blood and Fire Records label out of the UK, spearheaded by reggae collector, authority, and historian Steve Barrow, was in the midst of a celebrated run of releases reissuing rare and out-of-print reggae with a high standard of audio and visual presentation for a whole new generation of listeners who had not been around to appreciate them the first time around. That year, Blood and Fire would release a various artists compilation called Children of Jah, The Chantells and Friends, 1977 to 79, featuring evocative cover photography taken in Kingston in the 1990s by photographer Brian John to tie in with the theme of children, of youth, the promise of the future, and the struggles they undergo in the present. While perhaps not one of the label's biggest sellers, it was never issued on vinyl, only on CD. It's my original copy, bought new at the time. It would nonetheless be well received by fans of the label and turn a whole new generation on to the productions of Roy Francis and his late 1970s productions on the Phase 1 label in Jamaica, a label previously perhaps only known to longtime fans and collectors of the music. A couple of years later, in 2002, another UK reissue label, Motion Records, would put out a similar compilation of Roy Francis Phase 1 productions called We Are Getting Bad. No overlap between this and the Blood and Fire compilation. This one would come on vinyl from Motion Records, We Are Getting Bad. This would satisfy fans who had been salivating for more Phase 1 music since the Blood and Fire release. Phase 1, while a smaller, more obscure independent label with only somewhere around 30 single releases and a few LPs to its name, nonetheless punched far above its weight in terms of musical quality, with nearly everything that appeared on the label worth a listen. Stay tuned for my look at Roy Francis, The Chantells, and Phase 1. Roy Francis, founder and producer of Phase 1 Records, was born in Trenchtown, Jamaica in 1945. His parents had street corner booths where they would sell mangoes and other goods. As a child, he would see a youthful Bob Marley, also resident of Trenchtown, singing on street corners around the neighborhood. By 10, he had moved to Spanish Town, Jamaica, and by 17 had emigrated to the United States, where he would enroll in aeronautics college, going on to work as an airplane mechanic for airlines such as Pan Am and Delta. One perk of this job was that he got cheap flights, which he took advantage of by flying back to Jamaica every weekend to enjoy himself on his time off. On one of these trips back to the island, he began to romance a local Kingston girl by the name of Josette. She had a cousin named Derek Smith, who was nicknamed Gurr, and worked as a record seller for independent reggae music producer Jimmy Radway. Derek Smith got to know Roy Francis and approached him about the two of them going in on a musical venture of their own, with Roy putting up the finances and Derek Smith doing the hands-on producing. Roy had no musical background of his own. He was a jazz fan, a jazz LP collector, but otherwise had no experience on music, but was intrigued and decided to put up some money and fund some sessions. Derek Smith had come into contact with a vocal trio called the Chantells that he wanted to record and assured Roy were wicked. The Chantells consisted of lead singer Sam Bramwell, who had recorded the odd solo side, including Ruling Time in 1976, as well as the later Irago Dread in a Babylon. Lloyd Forrest, who had recorded a solo song called Where It's At for Studio One, as well as brief tenures in the Royals and the Jays, and Tommy Thomas. They had a strong US soul influence that they wore on their sleeves, yet in their first session for Roy and Derek Smith, held at Randy's studio at 17 North Parade in Kingston, with Leroy Horsemouth Wallace on drums, Robbie Shakespeare on bass, and Ansel Collins on organ, would all be of an intensely roots and culture nature. They would include Blood River, Stumbling Block, the strident Natty Supper, the meal in question, Ital Greens and Cullyweed, in a outspoken declaration of Rasta identity, and a song that would become a cornerstone of the future Phase One Records label, Children of Jah, originally recorded in a much different version than the one that would later appear on the Blood and Fire Records compilation and give its title to it. This early version was slower, looser, somewhat gospel-inspired, and with a quite different rhythm. That would appear on an obscure label called Hammer Productions, with the later cut later appearing on Phase One, and the striking lyrics of "When you see I, you see Jah Jah. Only Jah children can live on Yah. In Rasta parlance, there is no me or you. There's only I and I, because we all are one. So when you see I, you're seeing God, because we are all part of one divine unity." Children of Jah would go on to be a minor hit. Here's a Phase 1 12-inch. I have two versions of this. Phase 1 Records Disco Sleeve. This is the later, faster cut in an extended mix that appears on the Blood and Fire compilation. Phase 1 Records label. And also a different version, different Phase 1 label, but the same faster tempo cut. Phase 1 Records with its first out-and-out classic, the incredible and moving Children of Jah by the Chantells.
Children of Jah cannot suffer, oh yeah, more than what they can really bear. So all you have put on your pressure, oh yeah, Jah children will have no fear. You see Jah Jah, only Jah children can live on ya.
Come natty, come, let's have supper, supper time. Come natty, come, let's have supper. We've been down in the ghetto for a long, long time. No happy days and no peace of mind. Treat on this fight because we are dead. But come, let we show them now how not to live. Right now, come, let we show them now how not to live.
The Chantells' first four songs, recorded for Roy Francis and Derek Smith, had not been their first time in a studio. They had recorded a few scattered singles prior to that, including the mournful How Can I Get Over for female producer Sonia Pottinger. That song can be found on the 1996 Various Artists compilation The Reggae Train from Heartbeat Records out of the US, the Chantells with How Can I Get Over. More recently, as of 2020, it appeared on the Can't Stop the Dread compilation from the UK, Dr. Bird Records, both various artists' compilations of Sonia Pottinger Productions. However, the Chantells would emerge as the flagship act of Phase 1 Records. Roy settling on the name Phase 1 in reference to Channel 1 Studio, then firing on all cylinders and taking the reins of reggae with the faster, more militant rockers tempo that it pioneered. Roy would return to America, had to go back to his work for the airlines, would leave Derek Smith to run business in Kingston. A little while later, they would opt to go their separate ways, and Roy decided to return to the island and continue Phase 1 Records on his own, figured he had learned enough about the business to take over the reins himself. He would then run another session with the Chantells, this time at Joe Gibbs' studio, close rival to Channel 1 at this time in the late 1970s. This session would focus more on the romantic, soulful side of the Chantells and would result in two songs, Man in Love and Waiting in the Park, which would be the massive hit that would break the Chantells, both in Jamaica and internationally in the UK. Smash hit for the group, which sold well. The earlier first four songs had sold about 1,000 to 2,000 copies each. This song truly broke the group. Would appear on Phase 1 Records 12-inch, Waiting in the Park. Blank label on the B side, and also give its title to the first full-length LP from Phase 1 Records, the Chantells' debut and only LP, Waiting in the Park. The cover showing them posing in powder blue matching suits in the style of the US soul groups of the time. Don't let that fool you though. The Chantells were not soft individuals. The LP would contain a mix of romantic, soulful sides as well as the strident roots rockers as heard on Children of Jah and Natty Supper. I have two copies of it. This is a 2000s reissue from the UK through Sprint Records. Somewhat murky sound quality on the B side on this one. Label also subtitled The Chantells Collection, and a very different track listing to my 1978 US press. 1978 Phase 1 Records, black Phase 1 label. Phase 1 showcasing the title track, of course, as well as Children of Jah. Interestingly, this later 2000s reissue features the faster cut of Children of Jah as heard on that Blood and Fire compilation. This US press features the earlier, slower, looser version of it. Classic roots reggae LP by the Chantells. The song Waiting in the Park would then give rise to a second song utilizing the same rhythm, but with the Chantells in a more heartfelt reality mode with a song called Desperate Times, with a prescient line about youths being driven by desperation to commit crimes. That song would appear on the flip side of the Children of Jah 12-inch, the Chantells with Desperate Time on the same rhythm track as Waiting in the Park.
Right.
continuing to work with the Chantells as his most successful artist, Roy Francis would expand the roster of Phase 1 records over 1977 and 1978, while the occasional bigger name established artist would drop by for a one-off recording, the Heptones popping in for Deceivers, Tabby Diamond, the late lead singer of the Mighty Diamonds, popping in with a cover of Gonna Take a Miracle, DJs like U Brown and Prince Muhammad passing through for one-off sides. For the most part, Phase 1 would focus on very obscure, little-known, new and upcoming artists, many of whom Roy Francis would come into contact with in the course of running his recording sessions at Joe Gibbs or Channel 1 Studios, where he would be building buoyant, propulsive late 1970s rockers rhythms with the house bands there. These would appear as 7 and 12-inch singles on Phase 1 records in those years, and many of these, not all, I think there's a few scattered sides still not collected anywhere, but many of these would appear on the Children of Jah set from Blood and Fire Records, and We Are Getting Bad from Motion Records. Also in 2002, as a result of the renewed interest in Phase 1 records, the Sprint label in the UK would put out Phase 1 Collector's Edition, another various artists compilation. Quite good sound quality on this one. 2002. This would have some overlap with those two earlier sets, but also some tracks not included on either of those, including obscure singer Leroy King with Mash Down Babylon, another strong roots offering from Phase 1 Records, Paul Powell, little-known singer with Gina, with DJing by U Brown, kind of a reworking of the old 1950s song Venus. Obscure female group, Love Vibration, would have So Ashamed. It seemed in Kingston, Jamaica in the 1970s, you could not throw a stone without hitting some ridiculously talented vocal group, and more in the mold of the Chantells would appear on Phase 1 records. These would include a lesser-known group by the name of the Untouchables. Very little info about them. They seem to be a completely different group from the Inspirations, who had recorded Tighten Up for Lee Perry several years before, which was credited to the Untouchables when it was released in the UK. The Phase 1 Untouchables seems to be a completely different group. They had recorded a cover of Sea of Love, the old Twilights and Honey Drippers song, and also another stunning roots cornerstone of the Phase 1 label, Help Us Jah. A plea for deliverance from the many pressures going on in Jamaica in the 1970s, which creates a sense of tension by holding back on the chorus, making the listener wait for it, and then dropping it at just the right moment. Another group, the Terrors, would record one side only for Phase 1, Assemble Not Thyself. Nice to have that on this comp. It is included on the Blood and Fire set, but for some reason that song is never played on my Blood and Fire CD from New. The Terrors were another vocal harmony trio who had appeared on the flip side of an Itals 12-inch for the Spider-Man label shortly before, You Don't Care by the Itals. And on the flip side was a song called Don't Bother Me by the Terrors, kind of a Herb song, very plaintive. The Terrors were led by Donovan Brissett, who had been a sometime member of the Itals. Other artists would include another very obscure singer, Steve Boswell, who only recorded 2 sides for the label before dropping off into obscurity, both quite different from anything else on the label, with a real undercurrent of menace and dread. They would be Cool Rastaman Cool and We Are Getting Bad, lending its title to that Motion compilation. Jojo Hookham, owner of Channel 1 studio, urging Roy Francis to record a whole LP with Steve Boswell. Did not come to pass. Roy found him difficult to work with. Another plaintive voiced singer who sometimes has a similarity to Burning Spear was named Lopez Walker. He approached Roy one day while running one of his recording sessions with a song called New Garden. Roy would record it as Jah Jah New Garden, and the DJ Jah Berry, who seems to have not recorded for anyone other than Roy Francis, would do a DJ version of it called Daily News. Roy apparently had a whole LP with the DJ Jah Berry, who appeared on several Phase 1 sides, but that was never released. Lopez Walker would release a few more songs for Phase 1 records, many with a theme of deliverance, either from a prison, images of iron bars in his songs, or just from oppression in general. They would include Send Another Moses, Trial Days, and I'll Fly Away, included as the last song on Children of Jah, personal favorite of compiler Steve Barrow himself. Many very obscure artists on the Phase 1 record label, but all seem to have recorded something either very good, worth hearing, ranging to the completely and utterly sublime.
Whether you are raised, yeah. Rastaman, Rastaman, no make your heart be troubled and get you to be rude. You hear what they say? I address school, I address them, make no heathens turn you in and off. Come on and help I cross this river Jordan. I have been trying so long, but I just can't get over. Babylon them too rough, Babylon them too tough, yeah. Babylon them too rough for I and I, for I and I.
Decent stockpile of rhythm tracks built up, including several which had made up the bulk of the Chantells Waiting in the Park LP. Roy would issue in 1978 the second full-length LP on Phase 1 Records, a dub set called Phase 1 Dubwise. A second volume would follow in 1979, only in the UK, I believe. These would be reissued by the Sprint label again in the UK in the 2000s as a 2 LP set, both volumes together as Phase 1 Dubwise, volumes 1 and 2. Very cool cover art of the period there. Very lean, economical deconstructions here, focused on the rhythm, the drum, and the bass. Very few vocal samples on here. Mixing credited to Ernest Hookham at Channel 1, though Roy himself has at times indicated some involvement from Errol Thompson over at Joe Gibbs' studio, and even Prince Jammy at King Tubby's. Volume 1 largely focused on the Chantells Waiting in the Park rhythm tracks. Very economical instrumental dub with the occasional splash of reverb very much in the Channel 1 sound of the time. Volume 2, slightly later sound, maybe heavier and dreader in points. Includes versions of Lopez Walker's Jah Jah New Garden, as well as the Untouchables' Help Us Jah, a few Syndrome squelches and squiggles going on here and there. Phase 1 in Dubwise, Volume 1 and 2, along with the Chantells Waiting in the Park, the only full-length LPs issued by Phase 1 during its run. Demise of Phase 1 Records would come about almost as suddenly as its rise. With the popularity of the Chantells, a UK tour had been organized. However, when the group landed at Heathrow Airport, they were caught in possession of several pounds of herb, were jailed pending trial, had to remain in the country. Roy Francis, frustrated, outraged when he heard the news. The upshot of it was that 2 of the members went free, but 1 was jailed for several months in the UK. The Chantells, following this, would split. Phase 1's most popular act out of commission. Roy was also growing frustrated with other aspects of the recording business in Jamaica due to his frequent trips back and forth between his weekday job in America and Kingston. He had been fired from the airlines in America. He didn't mind that too much. He was making more money in Jamaica. However, the cheap flights definitely hurt his bottom line. Finally, he would throw his hands up, quit recording in Kingston, and return back to America, attempt to re-establish himself in the airplane business. He could not get a job as a mechanic right away, so he went into a firm that manufactured airplane parts, later would work in construction. He had his master tapes of Phase 1 records, by his estimation about 90 to 100 unreleased songs stored at a friend's apartment along with his jazz LP collection. However, there was a water problem, some hot water pipes burst, and everything was destroyed. Unreleased Phase 1 music by many big name artists lost forever. Roy would temporarily withdraw from the music business. Back in Jamaica, the members of the Chantells had gone their separate ways. Lead singer Sam Bramwell was killed in 1983, shot by police while attempting an armed robbery at a bauxite mine in Jamaica. However, by 1986, Roy had been working in construction in America, had saved up a bit of money, and conceived of an idea to return to the island and build a recording studio. At this point, several of the big studios had gone dormant, were in a bad state of repair. Channel 1 itself was in the process of closing down, so Roy returned to the island, built a state-of-the-art recording studio, which opened by 1988 and was called Mixing Lab. For the next several years, through the 1990s, I believe still active today, but it would be one of the busiest and most popular recording studios on the island. Roy would also start a Mixing Lab label, which would somewhat revive the Phase 1 name, though more in a distribution and marketing capacity. So the story of Phase 1 Records ultimately had a happy ending. Phase 1 Records itself having been a frustrating, not very profitable experience for Roy, but Mixing Lab much more successful. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.